Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 57 of B-Road Ballers, the review series for Gran Turismo's Hot Hatch selection. And in this particular pick we're featuring the second version of a vehicle which we've reviewed on here before, the BMW 1 Series, in particular the 120. And there are two different versions of this car, of course, the 120i and the 120d. Now the 120d we've already featured, and it's actually one of the most unique cars on Gran Turismo because it's the only diesel road car in the entire game that I'm aware of. Now, the fact that it's a diesel makes it kind of a gimmick on the game. In real life, of course, diesels are nothing special, you see them everywhere, but on the game it makes the car stand out and offers you something a little bit different, and you can feel the difference when you drive the car. It's got a very effortlessly punchy low-end torque, and although it is a little bit heavier, it's still got really good levels of lazy performance. You don't need to really push the car hard for it to give you strong acceleration, for instance, which is handy on twisty circuits and tight corners. Now this version is the 120i, the petrol model, and it's interesting to see how the two models stack up against each other. This particular model, for a start, is slightly cheaper, at just under 32 grand. Not by very much though, it's only around a grand or so cheaper. As far as PP, it's actually lower, interestingly enough, 503 to the diesel's 512, and the engine, which is a 2-litre turbo driving, of course, the rear wheels, because this is a BMW after all, puts out more power in the case of this model than the diesel. Unsurprisingly though, significantly less torque. The horsepower on this particular model is 369 and the torque is 280 foot-pounds, which doesn't sound too bad until you realise that the diesel version has 442. Quite a bit less on this car, but of course it is a petrol, so it's a completely different kind of performance. And as well as having more power than the diesel, this is a lighter vehicle at 1,093 kilos. That's not an amazing weight, but considering that it is rear-wheel drive, which is naturally a little bit heavier than front-wheel drive due to the extra components, that's not too bad. As far as horsepower per tonne, you're looking at, again, more than the diesel, 338. And although that's not amazing, it's not bad either, considering that this isn't really a hot hatch. The hot hatch version is the 130i M Sport, and that is not featured on the game, unfortunately. These two cars are more mainstream models with a slight power hike, in a similar way to vehicles like the Citroen C5 that's featured on the game, or the Xantia. Yes, they do have more power and larger engines, but they're not the hot versions of their respective cars. They're just a little bit more power, and that's it. And that is also the case with these two BMWs. Now, that being said, one of the best things about both of these, regardless of the petrol or diesel, is that they're pretty good sleeper cars. You don't see many people using them, people don't really give them a second thought. It's just a relatively ho-hum, everyday looking hatchback. Not a bad looking car by any means, but it just doesn't really stand out in the way that something like a Focus ST, for instance, does, or a Megane RS. It's not a hot hatch in that traditional sense. The performance, though, that both of them can give you is good enough to rival many of the lower to mid-level hot hatches. This is not a top-tier hot hatch. It's no HPA Golf rival or anything like that. But what it is a good hatch at its level. So for instance, if you're going up against stuff like the Ford Focus ST170, or even the slightly older model Focus ST, the Suzuki Swift, various other models like that, vehicles which are good, but not necessarily top tier, that's the kind of level where this BMW, and also the diesel version, are pretty good for, because they're not the expected choice, and that can work to your advantage in numerous circumstances. Now, of the two, I do prefer the diesel, and it's mainly because it is a diesel and it makes it more unique, but it is to be noted that the two cars are very different. They look virtually exactly the same as each other, but they are very different machines to drive. The petrol feels lighter on its feet, it has a more sprightly engine, it likes to be worked hard, and it produces its best power in higher revs, up around 7,000. The diesel, on the other hand, doesn't need that kind of run-up. it produces a huge amount of torque instantly. So it's got, yes, a weight disadvantage, but it's just a car that feels like it can just keep going, regardless, no matter what. It's not necessarily a significantly better endurance car, because most of the cars on Gran Turismo tend to have around a similar kind of fuel tank anyway, but overall, purely for performance, fuel economy aside, the diesel and the petrol both have individual advantages. If you're looking for a vehicle with more character, that's traditionally speaking more fun, if you will, then I'd recommend the petrol. If, though, you're like me and you really love stuff that's different and that other people don't necessarily appreciate as much as they should, such as having a diesel car on the game, which actually is a much better thing than most people think, then try the diesel. Personally, I never use the petrol and I love the diesel, so that's my verdict, but many people will feel the opposite. So, at the very least, if you are a hot hatch fan, especially a sleeper fan, I would recommend checking out either one of these cars, because they're both very good. But that's it overall for this particular pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.